Welcome in live. Well, probably recorded, but Joel and I are live here on Basketball by Association. My name is Arky. That is Joel. Joel, I think this is the year that now that we've got some infrastructure behind us, we need to do a live show every now and then.
It would be fun, although that intro just reminded me of the Simpsons episode. I don't remember which one, but this show is taped or is filmed live before a taped studio audience.
Oh, nice.
Wrap your mind around that. Yeah, this is episode 75, and I would definitely be up for a live episode. I know we've talked about trying to do some live episodes during games coming up here in the future too. That would be pretty sweet.
Maybe that opening night, maybe like the first game, like maybe we talked to our app people that we were talking to, and maybe that's when we sort of maybe get the roll. I'm doing a lot of things we should be doing off the air, but
right.
On the air,
we're just letting people see how the quiche is cooked. That's all we're doing here.
That sounds gross. Do you like quiche?
Not really.
Right.
We should
Why'd you bring it up, bro?
I don't know. Just trying to do anything besides talk basketball today. But if you're listening to us on Spreaker, Spotify, iTunes, wherever, thank you for that. Give us a like, give us a share, give us a subscribe. And come on over to the YouTube channel. Let's get some more people over there. And like, share, subscribe, do all that good stuff on the YouTubes if you want the video version of this show. It is episode 75, and no player in NBA history, Arky Shea, has ever worn number 75. So we have to go back and we have to take a look at MVPs or rookies of the year.
Okay.
And I found a fun one here. Last time we went very conventional. We gave it the Kareem Abdul-Jabbar episode for 74 because he was MVP in 73-74. This is the year 74-75, and we are not going to the National Basketball Association. Nay, we're going to the American Basketball Association, where things were indeed a little more unconventional there. And yes, we could have been conventional and called this the Dr. J episode because he was half of the MVP in 1974-75. Granted, keep in mind, this was a league that didn't have that many teams, yet somehow in the 74-75 season had a dual MVP. We're going to give it to the other guy who put together a pretty solid and respectable career himself. He was an all-star 6 different times, played in both the ABA and the NBA, and
John,
made a name for himself in both.
You're teasing me. I'm getting close. Tell me.
You don't have a guess?
No. Just tell me.
All right. I know these 70s stars are sometimes a little harder to come by.
I've gotten a couple of them, to be fair.
You absolutely have. This is the George Mcginnis episode. This was one of those guys who back in the day played above the rim and then some. And you talk about scoring machines. That 74-75 season where he shared the MVP with none other than Dr. J. My man, George Mcginnis, averaged 30 points and 14 boards a game, plus 6 assists and 2.6 steals. So a little bit of a two-way player, and certainly one of the fun guys from the ABA days. He was with the Pacers to begin his career. In fact, I believe he has his jersey retired with the Pacers, even though he only spent 4 seasons there to begin with. Then spent some time with the Sixers, played with the Nuggets, where he was very well known, was an all-star again in his age 28 season, and then went back to Indiana to end things. He played 3 seasons with the NBA version of the Indiana Pacers, and I think that 7-year span and pretty good throughout all of it is what got his number retired. And a nice little tie-in, Arky Shea, because today we're interviewing the Central Division in the NBA, where last time I checked, the Indiana Pacers are residing.
As of currently now, there could be some realignment going on. I don't know anything, but if I were to guess, they'd probably stay. You're right.
Yeah, if Arky puts in a call to the league, things may change. So.
Yeah, it's true. But I guess there's not a lot more central teams in the United States of America in the NBA than in Indiana, so they'll probably stay.
Right, unless you gave like Kansas City a team again.
Or
maybe Des Moines.
Yeah, at that point, it literally is just like Oklahoma City, and you're like, that's the only one. That's well, no, you could get Dallas in there, but that's not the central.
Yeah,
team,
Dallas.
Right?
Texas ain't central.
Yeah,
even Oklahoma City's pushing it. It's central enough, but
Yeah.
You're still like south of the Mason-Dixon line there.
Does Nebraska have a team? I think Nebraska has a team, right?
Thank goodness, no.
Oh. So we got a good show lined up for you. You got a couple notes about the East and the West getting a little bit stronger at the top. And then, Mr. Joel C. Cordes, we'll preview that Central Division. The one that hosts your current champions from the Eastern Conference. But first, Joel, just a couple of quick thoughts on a couple of huge... Okay, I'm bloviating a little.
They take some paper. That's what makes them huge.
A couple of notes that are happening. One is DeAndre Jordan is apparently going to complete and finish up a buyout with the Detroit Pistons, and then clear waivers, and then intends to sign with the Los Angeles Lakers. Now, before we get to that, let me just say that's on one end of the country. The other end of the country happens to see. Hold on. Excuse me.
They do have coughing over there too.
Yeah. They do, by the way. They do. We're going to see Lamarcus Aldridge come back to the NBA.
I'm really happy about that. I'm happy for Lamarcus.
Lamarcus Aldridge, you may remember in April, abruptly retired from the NBA, had the heart situation, and there was a lot of concern that, hey, listen, let's go that health first. Let's figure that out. But he is going to come back, and he intends to sign with the Brooklyn Nets. So either side of the country, the one that people are expecting to come out of the East, and the one
plus
that people
the Nets get Paul Millsap too, right? Like within 24 hours, they get both Millsap and Aldridge.
So apparently there are only two teams playing this season, right? Joel, or at least the only ones picking up players. But so we could just briefly go over those two because those aren't earth-shattering moves, but those aren't nothing moves either.
No, and for the Lakers, I like this, especially if Marc Gasol does not return. It's very much up in the air whether he does. I think it's overkill if Marc Gasol still is there. The Lakers have already shown that Anthony Davis can handle minutes at center. Yeah, it's not his preference, but he's on record as having told Carmelo Anthony that part of the appeal of bringing Carmelo aboard is that Anthony Davis was willing to play more center minutes if it meant that he could be on the same front line with LeBron and Carmelo, which makes a ton of sense. So I don't know how many traditional center minutes there are actually going to be to go around with the Lakers. We also know that Dwight Howard, though he's on the back end of his career, has shown outside of maybe foul trouble that he's sprightly enough to probably handle half of the minutes, 24 minutes a game at center and do fine.
That's a good adverb for him. He's sprightly. Yeah, he gets sprightly. Yeah, there's some pep in that step, just in short bursts.
He's moving a lot better over the last two seasons that we've seen him with the Lakers and then last year with the Sixers. He moved a lot better than those really nadir years with the Wizards and the Hawks and when he was in danger of flaming out with the league where there were back issues that were there as well. So, if Marc Gasol is not in the picture and you're going to split probably about 36 center minutes between Dwight and DeAndre Jordan, I think you can live with that. And Anthony Davis plays about 12, if not a little bit more. I don't know why you'd want to waste a roster spot on a third traditional center at this point. But again, the league is trending bigger. Very quietly, the league is trending bigger on the front lines because I think we've seen the bubble burst on if everyone's going small ball, you don't have an advantage anymore. And Los Angeles is still going to have to go through teams that do play big. The Clippers can go small or big, but the Nuggets certainly go big. And there's a lot of others in the Western Conference as well that they're probably going to see that have traditional front lines. Portland plays a traditional front line. The Mavericks play traditional, all that sort of thing. So it's not earth-shattering. We've seen already that DeAndre Jordan, yes, can finish a lob. Yes, he can grab a rebound. Defensively, can he still protect the rim? Yes. But he no longer moves well enough to be able to hold his own in the high pick and roll, which is where he immediately will get put. And that's where teams are going to attack him. So, yeah, this looks really, really good if you're building that 2009 2K team. So many great names out of this from 10 years ago. So much playoff experience. So many guys who certainly are going to be hungry to chase that ring. And good teams are often built out of just that. Veterans who have been there, done that, and know now that they can come in and play 10 minutes and nail those 10 minutes and do their job, that can be a huge difference maker when you're not asking them to trot out and play 30 minutes anymore.
Yeah, and I won't have much to add on this except for because I think you've hit all the the nails in the head. But I think the big thing that says is that I think the Lakers are expecting Marcus Gasol to go away. Like I think that this seems to like I think we had already sort of felt that coming, but I think this was sort of like the last piece to say, all right, thank Mark. We kind of we see the writing on the wall from you and probably from our end too. We sort of understand, and we're shoring up a piece for. We'll go help. This guy orchestrates a buyout from Detroit, and we can use him for 8, 10, 12 minutes or something at a time. Like
it certainly sends the message to Mark that we don't need you. Like we're moving on. So if you want to be a part of this, you're probably down the totem pole already. And maybe it is that slight nudge, like you're saying, to go. It's best if you don't come back.
Yeah, but Lamarcus on the other end of the country, you were just said like you're really excited to sort of see this and happy for him. You can expound upon that if you want, and then what he means for the importance of Brooklyn and to try to make this team a championship winner this year.
Yeah, you never feel great when a guy's career is cut short for any reason. You think of like Isaiah Thomas and the stuff that's happened to him, or DeMarcus Cousins continuing to like soldier through, but what he is now versus what he was. You never like to see that happen. And I think there's another level of sadness, like when a guy's career is cut short by a basketball injury. We all understand that's part of the dice roll, but a heart issue, or you think of like what happened to Alonzo Mourning, and thankfully he was able to come back, or Chris Bosh, who's entering into the Hall of Fame now, and how he at least had 3 or 4, if not more, good years left. And didn't get to do that because of internal non-basketball issues that just kind of rob you of that. So for Lamarcus to come back, I think it's eyebrow raising because we really did feel like he was done. The severity of what he was talking about at that time really seemed like he was going to be done. But remember, Chris Bosh tried to come back and play as well. So there still is the unknown about whether we hope Lamarcus will be able to come back and plug away with a couple more years here, but we don't know that that's a given. What he actually gives to the Nets, we talked about this when he signed there last year after the Spurs released him. He certainly can hit a mid-range jumper. He certainly is good as an outlet valve. He's never been a phenomenal rebounder or even a strong defender, but he's not a minus in either of those categories. And I think when you're looking at the Eastern Conference and you've got Joel Embiid and you've got Giannis especially, but even some of the other lesser teams like, in the Central Division, you're going to go through Domantas Sabonis, and there's a lot of good centers hanging out in the Eastern Conference that just having another big body who knows what he's doing so that it's not just Blake Griffin and a worn out DeAndre Jordan, which is what they had last year, or a Nick Claxton, who Claxton shows a lot of promise, but is certainly wet behind the ears still, and you're a championship team. So you don't have a lot of margin for error to let a young kid come in and make those early mistakes. I'm more excited about Millsap, who we'll talk about in a second, but Aldridge still gives you value. Just not a lot of defense on that front line, especially when Blake Griffin, we did see play really well, really great defense actually, but that's not what he's known for either.
Yeah, I was just going to say the thing about Aldridge, he's 36, right? Like, so when you think about a guy who's 36 and says like heart issue, the guy who's had a really good career in the NBA, a very respectable and borderline just good career in the NBA. When you talk about the era that he's played in, like he's one of those guys that was a handful of years ago that people were looking at him being in like the upper echelon. He was playing in an upper echelon type level. At 36 and you hear art issue, you sort of think, okay, we're going to back it down. That makes sense that, you're going on the tail end of your career anyway. You hear something about the heart, not really a rush to come back into the league, right? Like you've made up a whole bunch of money, generational type wealth.
Right.
So to come back is an inspiring story. And I think you're completely right. When, like you think hey, an Achilles injury on the court, you get rolled up on in his ankle that, like LeBron, you just never really get back to who you are. Like, you get it.
Tear
right?
an ACL at the end of your career, that sort of thing.
Yeah, you get it. But like something like this is like completely takes you for a loop. So the fact that he came back, I'm stunned. This is one of the biggest surprises of me in the offseason is that he's coming back and he's going to be able to be a contributor on a team, any team for that matter, let alone to be a team who I think it's fair to say won't need him nearly as much as some other teams may. So that might
for
help.
Sure.
Might help for him as far as long-term health-wise, and his heart. But I'm excited for him to get in the league, back into the league, just because it's a really nice comeback story for a guy who still is a pretty good player.
Yeah, I mean, to mix sports metaphors here, when I look at the Aldridge signing, you're picking up a middle reliever, or you're picking up a change of pace back. This is a guy who will give you a couple of different looks if you need it. You're not going to need it every night, and you're fine with that. You don't want him probably playing more than 10 to 12 minutes a game. To me, the Millsap signing is the more valuable one, because Paul Millsap certainly is diminished as an offensive player. He doesn't play above the rim anymore. And he's always been an undersized power forward, but he's always been one of the better defensive guys at that spot up front, and always a really strong shot blocker for a 6'8" power forward. Plus, he still knocks down a jumper. So this is a guy who I think gives you more minutes. And again, to take a baseball metaphor, Paul Millsap can be a closer for you. He can be on that end of game lineup when you need somebody other than Kevin Durant out there to be able to get a stop. And knowing that you're going to have to face Giannis, and that you don't want Kevin Durant, again, being the only body capable of playing defense on him, Paul Millsap gives you another very credible look. They also signed James Johnson. We'll get into all the Nets stuff later when we preview their division. But it's very clear that the Nets kind of learned their lesson after that Eastern Conference Finals, when they were down bodies anyway. But that they needed some other answers for Giannis. Paul Millsap is a no-brainer when you can pick him up on essentially a vet minimum deal.
Yeah.
And he doesn't have to have a lot left in the tank. He's just got to have enough left in the tank for those key minutes. And I think he's more than capable of that, as he proved with the Nuggets over the last couple of years.
All right, Joel, you ready to take a look at the Central Division of the Eastern Conference?
Let's do it. Get out your corn cobs.
That's what? That's where you're defending NBA champions.
Middle of the United States. That's the Corn Belt.
Yeah, defending NBA champions are coming from that very division. The Milwaukee Bucks won that division by 12 games. How impressive was that? The next largest margin between conference winner and number two, or division winner and number two, was 5 games. A huge roll for Milwaukee.
Yes, impressive for the Bucks. I think they would have won that many games regardless. It helps that you got to play some bottom feeder teams so many times in your division. I think it's more a testament to how much of a down year the rest of the division had, honestly. But it is curious to me. I wonder if the Bucks would have won 60 games in a regular season with 82. Granted, we played 72 games, and 10 more wins. If they would have won all 10, they would have only won 56. So they probably weren't on pace to win 60 games, but there were times last year they looked capable of that.
Yeah, and they were a team inside the division. Maybe they did a little beating up. They were 11-1 in the division. That includes Indiana, Chicago, Cleveland, and Detroit. So not a lot of great teams that are in that division for them, but some teams that have tried to do some things in the offseason to try and get better and to not only be able to compete necessarily with Milwaukee, but to be able to get inside the playoff race. Because Indiana did make the playoffs, let us not forget, just in the play-in version of the playoffs, which still technically counts, because if you would have won all of the games throughout that tournament, you would have still been declared the NBA champions. So, Joe, let us start with the NBA champions of a 12-game plus division winning Milwaukee Bucks. Are they better than what they were last year?
I think on paper they are. I like what they've done over the offseason here. I typically am an offseason optimist, because you love to try to get inside a GM's head of why they're bringing in certain people that they did. And to bring Grayson Allen aboard from the Memphis Grizzlies, Allen is another guy that can hit some threes. He can handle the ball a little bit. He is fiery. He's a dirty player sometimes too. But I think having another one of those kind of edgy guys, especially when you're losing PJ Tucker, it's good to have that. I think that will play well in with the crowd there in Milwaukee. He's also the insurance policy with Dante DiVincenzo, who is coming back from injury. We don't know exactly when he'll be back, but Allen does a lot of things that DiVincenzo did. I like that they bring Rodney Hood in. That's a name that's been floating around the NBA seemingly for like 12 years, and in a lot of ways it has. Hood is very much the definition of a replacement level wing at this point, but there's nothing wrong with that when that's a guy that you're asking for 12 minutes per game and a guy who can knock down a three a little bit, and he's not immobile. He's not a terrible defender. They bring in Semi Ojeleye, who gave very sporadic minutes for the Boston Celtics, but is kind of a beefier, stronger, if not undersized tweener forward. But you get the sense that the Bucks are more than willing to play Giannis at the 5 a little bit more than they have in the past. In the fact that you've got Brook Lopez, a traditional center, and that's it as the only bodies on that roster at that traditional 5. You got Bobby Portis, who of course is now a cult hero in Milwaukee for that run that he had, over the playoffs and down the stretch for them. And I really love Bobby Portis there, not only with the effort and the motor he played in and the fact that he, just ties in with the crowd real well, but the fact that you can put Bobby Portis next to Brook Lopez, or you can put him next to Giannis, and you're just fine either way. But even if Giannis and Brook are both sitting, you put Bobby Portis at the 5 now, and you've got a body in Semi Ojeleye. You've got Domantas Sabonis, who, again, is kind of an undersized tweener, but can play the 4 against certain lineups. You could go real small with Rodney Hood at that spot, especially if you've got Chris Middleton out on the floor. So they just seem to be a little more interchangeable now all of a sudden, which is perfect when Giannis is your fulcrum. The one thing I don't like about their offseason is retaining Jeff Teague and bringing in George Hill. Mm-hmm. Drew Holiday's not a young chicken himself and has had some injury issues over the course of his career. Jeff Teague, to me, the only reason he's in Milwaukee at all, and the only reason he's still in the league, is because he's a Mike Budenholzer guy back from their time in Atlanta. And he was brought in, and I know he had a couple of decent playoff moments, but Jeff Teague has been just nondescript for a few seasons now, dating back to his time in Minnesota, which is like 3-4 years removed. I don't know what Jeff Teague actually does for you as a basketball team beyond dribble the ball down the court and get you into your offense, and occasionally will make a shot. I have to believe there's better options. George Hill, I think, is fine as a third point guard at this point in his career. He's lanky. He can play the 2 guard a little bit. He's a better defender still than people realize. He can shoot a little bit, but he's definitely, again, on the tail end of his career. And dating back to the last Cleveland Cavaliers championship iteration with LeBron James, George Hill looked like he didn't have a ton left in the tank. When you ask too many minutes for him, he gets exposed really quick. I'm fine with George Hill at like 10, 12 minutes a game tops. I'm fine, I guess, if Jeff Teague never plays but is on your roster because he knows Budenholzer's systems. But I'm a little bit concerned that that's your point guard depth if Drew Holiday goes down. I know Giannis can play point. I know Pat Connaughton and DiVincenzo and Grayson Allen can bring the ball up, but that's a little scary, right?
I think so. I think to a degree. I think if you're now, again, this is a team that we literally doubted every 2 games in the playoffs.
Yes.
Whether or not what they were doing was right, whether or not it was going to work, and they're your defending world champions, and it worked out for them this year. But I think, Joe, we're also looking in the prism of we don't expect 2021 to be similar to 2020 when it comes to the rash of injuries, and to be a little fair to everyone, how the path kind of cleared itself up to a degree for Milwaukee to make that run outside of Philadelphia, who was really healthy right? Like,
well, and remember Philly, they even had some health issues right down the end of the stretch again too. So
that's true. I mean, that also includes. Embiid was not only at the beginning of the season, but like it looked like he was mucked up with his knee, especially when it came, excuse me, to that Atlanta series, or for at least a game or so. It felt like it. We're sort of looking at the prism of this year's probably going to be harder to win that title, and it's going to be tough to repeat because we expect Brooklyn to not be injured the entire season. We're expecting Philly not to have Ben Simmons and maybe be a little bit better, maybe without Ben Simmons on that team. I'm sure Joel Embiid would probably be okay with Ben Simmons not being on the team.
Yeah, but and Atlanta's coming up, and
Atlanta is a very steady, strong, young team that's got a lot of spunk and energy, and it's got good shooters and a good chemistry that's going on about it.
And also wasn't fully healthy either. You look at what they can be just on paper if they've got everybody healthy and the stars align there. That's a giant killer with that Hawks team.
And of course, I don't even know why we waited this long. The Knicks, who clearly have gotten miles and miles better. Right. We don't think it's going to be as easy of a road for Milwaukee just to get back to the championship. And also, that second year for teams to repeat, like there is when you've been chasing it this long, like Milwaukee, and you're the small market franchise, there's going to be some hangover effect. I don't know how much, but I also don't know how much their offseason sort of improved where their stock is going to be by the time we get to the playoffs. They'll probably still be a top 3 seed, probably at the worst case scenario, probably even top 2. But I don't know when it gets deep into Brooklyn or Philadelphia or Atlanta, whether or not I'm going to like them out of those series. But also, I feel like I said that a couple of times this last postseason. So maybe Mike Budenholzer knows what he's doing, feels like it a little bit. But yeah, I'm with you. I don't know if I'm in love with their offseason, but they're also the defending champs. So they probably didn't feel like they needed to do a lot to be able to be in a good position this year.
No, they did certainly feel like they were too shallow as they got really deep into the playoffs. They always felt like, man, they're only trust 7 guys, and that's dangerous. Now I feel like there's at least more opportunities. There's other guys there that theoretically could and should be in a playoff rotation, and that you can trust some minutes to maybe not overtax Giannis and Chris Middleton, neither of whom are old to the point that you're wanting to overtax, but you always try to save mileage wherever you can. During the regular season, I think they've got that flexibility to do more things this year. So I like where they went. I do feel they took a step forward. Whether that's enough compared to the steps forward that all the other teams around them are making, all of that, again, comes down to Giannis. It truly does. Like, if Giannis is continuing to play at an MVP caliber level and shoots free throws at a replacement player level, Milwaukee is good enough to repeat. Yes, because nobody else has a Giannis, but it ain't going to be easy. It's not going to be easy.
No. Let's go to the runner-ups in that division, the Indiana Pacers, who re-signed T.J. McConnell. Torrey Craig is a part of that team. They signed Chris Duarte of Oregon and Isaiah Jackson. Drafted out of Kentucky. Did Isaiah Jackson come from? Aaron Holiday's not on that team anymore. Doug McDermott's not on that team anymore. Joe, when we were doing our previews last year, there were a couple teams where we just sort of went, yep, they had an off season. Orlando was one of those, by the way, where like, hey, you didn't really sort of do anything.
Yep.
I feel like I'm in a similar position with Indiana. Like, there's nothing here that makes me think, yay, especially when we're about to talk about a couple teams who did do some things.
The sad part with the Pacers is that if they would stay healthy, you see what they're trying to do and what they have been trying to do for the last few seasons. Like, you saw on paper and theoretically could imagine it, how Malcolm Brogdon and Victor Oladipo, for example, were going to be a really fun, gritty, multifaceted backcourt that was going to be a handful for people. And, Brogdon has been a guy that is kind of like an Anthony Davis. He just always seems to have something that's nagging him or wrong, and he's out for a few games and then comes back. Oladipo, of course, like his career has been derailed by injuries now, and they never really got to see how that worked. But then they pull that trade and they bring Karis LeVert in last year. LeVert, of course, coming in off the heart scare. That's a guy who's had, the double ACLs replaced. And but LeVert, when he's been healthy with his time with the Nets, and even when he came to the Pacers, like he puts up buckets, and putting him next to Malcolm Brogdon again, LeVert's a bigger guard, and it's fun. Like TJ Warren was a guy who very quietly for some Phoenix Suns teams that no one was paying attention to was a very solid NBA level starter with some upside. I don't know that upside exists anymore because of his injury issues. Ditto for Jeremy Lamb, but both of those guys are intriguing players. You've got very solid rotation players in TJ McConnell and Justin Holiday. And then up front, you've got two incredibly talented bigs in Domantas Sabonis and Miles Turner. It still is that open question of how well they fit together, but we've seen a lot of positive data for that lineup over the last year or two as these questions kind of reached a crescendo. We saw them make it work, but we also saw Miles Turner, who was the leading defensive player of the year candidate for about 2/3 of last season, then also go down with injury. And so this Pacers team has never been right with the whole group that's been envisioned with it. And I think if everybody's there and you're clicking on all cylinders, this absolutely is a playoff team for real. But how can we say if when we've never seen that happen yet?
Yeah, I was also going to ask, how much of this do you think also is the attractiveness of Indiana to a free agent? I mean, it's not just where you would go play, it's the team that's around you. And I'm not going to say players do this, but I am kind of going to intimate it. Very snake bit. It feels like that organization has been for not just a little while, for a while now. It doesn't seem like the most attractive place to even try to get free agents. So even though I say there wasn't a lot done, maybe that's sort of the max of what they could get done, just as far as the free agency wasn't very noisy for them anyway. But, I don't know what else they could have done, to be honest with you. I mean, they could be at sort of a bit of a disadvantage.
Yeah, for example, I really like Torrey Craig. I like what he brings to the table. I like Keelan Martin a lot, who's been there as last season as a backup small forward who can hit some threes. And I think because Martin played well down the stretch when everyone got hurt, it made Doug McDermott expendable. McDermott played really well off their bench, especially with TJ McConnell. They had some really good chemistry. But McDermott is, again, an older player, probably looking to win a little bit more, and Martin made him expendable. But these are all guys where you go, yeah, he's got value as an NBA player. He brings good things to the table. Do they have a superstar on that team? It depends on how you feel about Sabonis, who's like a fringe star / superstar guy. And then you've got a couple in Miles Turner and Malcolm Brogdon, and I guess Karis LeVert as well, where they're certainly like all-star-ish caliber players. You're not going to be surprised if they make an all-star game, but you're not going to be surprised when they were like on the fence and somebody else got in instead. That's just where they're at. And is that good enough to take down some of these powerhouse teams in the Western Conference or Eastern Conference? Sorry. The answer is probably no. But we've also seen teams that sometimes if you get the chemistry just right, and it's that sum that's greater than its parts, Indiana could be that in a best case scenario as well, where all of a sudden they have a phenomenal season again and they steal a 3rd or a 4th seed. I don't think that's going to happen, but I think it's possible, especially now that Nate Bjorkgren is out. Remember, this was a team that like struggled to score points under the Nate McMillan regime. They bring in Nate Bjorkgren, and in one season, they suddenly become the 5th highest scoring team in the NBA. There's some credit there that all those players and their coaching staff were able to suddenly turn a team that seemingly couldn't score, and with the same personnel is lighting up the scoreboard. Now, the flip side of that is their pace was so out of control that they gave up just as many points, and they formerly had been a good defensive team. So we got to see what their identity even looks like this year.
Yeah, that is a really good question. Is that as much as we sit here and sort of talk about what we might sort of see from Indiana, I feel like there's a big giant question mark as far as just what they even want to be themselves. Like I'm not sure if this is trying to be that run and gun, score a bunch, give up a bunch type of team, or if you get some kind of revert back to the deep, or if how much injuries and stuff played into that. We talked about that with the Lakers before. Like injuries sort of forced them to be a great defense. Like they really sort of packed it in and became a really great defense at the end of the season. I'll be very surprised or very interested to see what Indiana has. That's one of my teams that I'm really excited to sort of see what they are. Probably right behind this next team, the Chicago Bulls, Mr. Joel C. Cortez. Now, they've done some things. All right.
Most definitely.
Lonzo Ball's on this team now. DeMar DeRozan's on this team now. Derrick Jones Jr.'s on this team now.
Alex Caruso's
on this team now. Zach LaVine was already on this team. When we just talked about what the roster's out, Nick Vucevic is already on this team. Kobe White's still on this team. I think I haven't missed anything, right? He's still on this team, right?
He is, yeah.
Chicago's a team that was 3 games out of the play-in game. I don't think it's impossible to find them in the playoffs this season, Joel. Please talk me off this ledge.
No, I think you're absolutely right. I don't know when I became a Bulls apologist, but it seems like for the last 3 or 4 off seasons, I keep looking at this roster going, yes, this makes sense. Whether it was Wendell Carter Jr. and Lauri Markkanen up front, all of the different young guys that they've cycled through, I kept looking at those rosters going, this makes a ton of sense at every position. I like this. This is good. This should be a playoff team. I thought they were going to be a playoff team last year under Billy Donovan. And then every single season, it's either been that combination of poor coaching dating back to the Jim Boylan era, but even before that to like Fred Hoiberg. So you had the coaching issues. You had poor roster fits. You think about like when they tried to bring in Rajon Rondo and Dwayne Wade to match with Jimmy Butler, and just so you had those issues. But then moving past it, as they got into the younger player era, I've really liked these last few rosters, and they just haven't been mature enough or healthy enough. A major guy goes down at the wrong time, or there's multiple players down, and they just can't seal the deal. And once again, I look at this and go, oh my goodness, you got Lonzo Ball, who's a much better defender than people realize. He's a big guard. Obviously, he just wants to pass the rock, but he's been a much better three-point shooter than we thought he was going to be. Like, he's a credible, poor man's Jason Kidd type out there on the court. And that's the guy that you have to throw lobs to Zach LaVine.
Right.
Yes. Yeah. Sign me up for that, you know?
Yeah.
And, you know, LaVine really loves to play the mid-range game, but he can hit the three. He likes to be above the rim. He truly is an NBA level scorer. It's the defensive end that's always been the major question mark, but that's where Ball, being a very credible NBA defender, and where Alex Caruso getting in on the mix, I think you have some insurance to cover for LaVine's weakness there. DeMar DeRozan has been a better defender than people give credit for a long time. He's not great, but it's kind of like Chris Middleton, where the guy holds his own and he's not going to be a detriment there. DeRozan is also getting to that tail end of his career, but he was very effective in his plus-minus numbers, his efficiency numbers last year for the Spurs, so much so that DeMar DeRozan was a fringe all-star candidate last year. And I don't think it's impossible that in the Eastern Conference, where he's back now, I don't think it's impossible that he gives them really efficient minutes. Whether he plays enough to be all-star caliber or not, I don't know. But that's a good, solid veteran at that spot next to some of your younger guys who really aren't so young anymore. Alex Caruso, young player, but has been playing on championship contending teams now over the last couple seasons. And up front, you know, Nick Vucevic is one of those guys that you just want him to be able to play on a winning team, right?
Right.
He's put up such huge numbers for middling teams. And yes, some of that is on his shoulders. There are certain guys who just their entire careers put up great numbers and weren't actually winners. And maybe that's Vucevic, but the dude just puts up points and rebounds and can shoot the three a little bit too, and is a big body inside. And I love that then you put just a really athletic, strong, kind of undersized power forward, but a guy whose calling card is being that 5-tool defensive player in Patrick Williams. That's the perfect sort of player that you want next to Nick Vucevic up front. And you look at that starting five of Ball, LaVine, DeRozan, Pat Williams, and Vucevic, and you go, yeah, they can do some things. They can do some things. And it's not a terrible supporting cast behind them. We've mentioned Alex Caruso. Kobe White looked in flashes like he could be a starting caliber guard. A lot of the question marks rose from, is Kobe White a starting caliber point guard though? Or is he better as a combo guy? And I think the experiment now is to dial into that and go, look, White can play either guard spot. Let's give him the opportunity to do that. Caruso can play either guard spot. Let's have him do that too. And now we can mix and match with, depending on whether Ball or LaVine or both are sitting. Up front is where I'm a little more concerned. Derrick Jones Jr., yes, we all know the guy can fly. He's also had a couple of really good opportunities the last couple seasons with Miami, with Portland last year, to really like carve out a rotation gig for himself. And he has failed to do that now in multiple seasons where he was given the opportunity and then by the end of the season wasn't really in a rotation anymore. He's not young enough that's just forgivable. Troy Brown Jr., I think that's another guy where they're just bringing in a defensive body. He played with the Wizards last year. Not a great offensive player, but again, kind of a Patrick Williams type body where you can play that undersized with him at either forward spot. Stanley Johnson, a former lottery pick for the Pistons, also has come aboard with Chicago now. He just signed today. So this is another team that Nick Vucevic is the traditional center on the roster. They do have Tony Bradley on the roster. I don't know how much he will actually play, but you really get the sense that they're going to want to mix and match a little bit and go small up front. And that makes sense given the talent of the guards they have to play at a good pace. And I've been a big Billy Donovan fan since he came to the NBA, but back when he was in college too. I do feel like he's one of those guys that kind of tailors what he's doing to his personnel. And I was really excited when he became the Bulls coach last year. I was hopeful that he would be enough to get them to the playoffs. It was disturbing that it wasn't enough. And that's probably why some of the guys like Wendell Carter Jr. and Lauri Markkanen and them are gone now. But man, I want to be wrong on these Bulls at some point, and we're right in this case. I want to be right. And I really would love to see them back in the playoffs again.
Yeah, people sort of also forget, go back way to an earlier point you're making. Lonzo Ball's 6'6", man. Like that's a big fella. Like people just think he's like this little guy. No, he's a big guard.
Right, and strong too. It's a strong 6'6", and LaVine is 6'6" as well. Like
he's a bull, no pun intended. Like he's a bull out there. So he is going to be a really big piece for Chicago. I think this team, I'm on them to make the playoffs and to be a top 6 seed. I think they can be that good this year. I don't know how much further, maybe even like a 5 seed, maybe, I mean, it'll sort of depend on.
Yeah, that's probably their ceiling.
I like to see like how some of the things play out this season, but I think they could be a 5, 6 seed, probably tops, but I think they could get a 6 seed. And if
it's possible, it's possible. Yeah. The issue though, is like how many other teams legit right now fall into that category. And this is always what happens during the offseason. But you look at the Knicks and you go, they're about that level too, right? That's about their ceiling. Right. Charlotte, you can say the same thing.
Charlotte's right there too.
Indiana, absolutely. We just said the same thing. I think Atlanta's got a higher ceiling than any of these teams, but maybe realistically, if Atlanta has some growing pains, which happens to young teams in that kind of second season, after people figure out who they are, that's possible. Miami is in this mix. Certainly Miami's ceiling looks like it could be higher than that again, but
I'll tell you this, with Chicago, I think there's only Philly, Brooklyn, Milwaukee, and probably Atlanta are the only 4 teams that I think are definitely
Do you take Miami above them? Because I'll take Miami above them. We didn't even mention Boston or Washington, but they've got some issues.
Yeah, but yeah, I think those are the only 4 I feel really comfortable now saying. Miami's probably on the fringe there, probably with, again, like we're starting to get to those teams. They're like Boston, New York, Miami. I don't know.
Charlotte, Charlotte's got a lot of upside that could really pop all of a sudden, which we were already seeing a little bit last year. That
bottom half of the 8 for the East is going to be a jumble fun word smash.
Yeah, I'm here for it. Yeah, sign me up for that. I love the crowded playoffs races at the end of the season.
A team that's probably not going to be the playoff race, but I'm okay with being surprised, is the next team on the list. We're down to 2 more left in the Central. Cleveland is next. They picked up Evan Mobley in the draft, a number 3 overall pick out of USC. They signed Jared Allen to an extension. We just mentioned Lauri Markkanen is going to be there from the aforementioned Chicago Bulls. Ricky Rubio, I don't know how much he sort of moves the needle for you, but he is now on the roster for a team that's salty at times. Got a pretty good Collin Sexton on his team. He's got a pretty good who's the guy from Auburn? It just
Isaac Okoro.
Yeah, Isaac Okoro, who I love, by the way. Shows because I remembered his name so vividly. But Cleveland may not, they may be, I think play-in tournament is probably where is their ceiling as far as their contention this year. But I don't think they had a bad off season, especially since the draft got you the number 3 pick and Evan Mobley, who I really, really like.
The only bad thing that has happened this offseason is that Kevin Love is still on the roster and that they haven't been able to find a way out of that situation, because it's a looming cloud over a young team that really shouldn't have to give a crap about Kevin Love anymore.
Yeah.
And has to, and vice versa. Love would be better served signing with one of these playoff, championship contending teams and doing that here.
Kevin Love's also the guy that, half-assed it a couple of times last year. One very famous example coming from an inbound throw in last year.
Barking at teammates at different points too, where it was unnecessary. And
he kind of is like the guy hey, old man, come on, just take a buyout, go somewhere. Come on.
Yeah, no, I agree. But outside of that, again, I look at Cleveland's roster and I see what they're trying to do. Okoro and Mobley up front, and then Jared Allen, that could be a nasty defensive front line.
I just mentioned
nasty.
That those kids can play, man. Those kids, that trio guy, they're not going to be.
That's like Bad Boys Pistons 2 level of what that could be, where you talk about the Wallace brothers and Tayshaun Prince.
Yeah.
That's what the blueprint that I see there. And yes,
interesting.
All 3 of them are raw offensively in their own ways. Jared Allen's the most polished, but he's also been in the league the longest. But I think that's why it was a coup that they get Lauri Markkanen for basically nothing, where Markkanen's big thing has been, he can light up the basket a little bit, but defensively, we got some worries about this guy, about whether he's a starter or whether he's going to be like the next Dirk Nowitzki, which is what he was billed at because he's a big white shooter. He's probably not going to top out at that. But if all of a sudden you can insulate Lauri Markkanen with guys like Okoro and Mobley and Allen, and now you're not worrying that those guys can't shoot because who's taking the shots on the front line. Dylan Windler is a guy who they drafted and really felt high about, and he got hurt almost immediately last year. So I like where the front line is supposedly going. I'm not sold on the Garland Sexton backcourt. I get it. 2 interchangeable guards, both very athletic. Collin Sexton incredibly quick. But I look at those guys and I look at even the 3 upfront players that we just mentioned, and I go, are all of these guys just really, they're starter level NBA players at best? Is there a star out of any of these guys? I look at Collin Sexton, for example, is a perfect example. And these are different players from different eras. But you think back to the 90s and a guy like Mookie Blaylock, or in the 2000s, a guy like Jameer Nelson for the Magic. And solid starters, even made an all-star game or two. I think Nelson made one and Blaylock made one, maybe two. Brought some good things to the table, but that was it, right? I mean, there's no shame in it, but if they were your best player or among your top 3 players, you probably weren't a playoff team. Yeah. And that's kind of what I'm wondering about Collin Sexton. Like, I know he can score, and I know Darius Garland can do a little bit of everything, and I'm fine. Again, this could be another one of those teams that in time, just everybody vibes so well with each other and they fill the roles. And so you can do kind of like what the Utah Jazz have done and plenty of really good teams over the years have done. But notice a lot of those teams don't have championships. They were just really good regular season teams that then got into trouble in the playoffs when they're up against true superstar studded teams, because that means so much in the NBA. And I don't see that on this Cleveland Cavaliers roster. Yeah, they keep getting lottery picks and they keep taking their shots at it, and we'll see. So I don't hate what they're doing. To me, they're definitely not a playoff team, even in the right scenario. I feel bad for Ricky Rubio because he's done his job as a mentor in a lot of places, but this is another guy who just keeps getting sent to bad teams and just like is not going to win a lot of games in his career. The only weird oddity here is that Rubio and Kevin Love are reunited back to their Minnesota Timberwolves days, where they had some success for a season or two and lost a ton of games otherwise together.
Yeah, I'll say I like Collin Sexton a lot. I think he's the closest to becoming a star. Like you say, he scores a bunch of points. I think he had like 23 or 24 a game last year. He's not great at shooting the three, but he also doesn't shoot a bunch of them. He's more of a basket attacker kind of guy. Pretty good dishing the ball out, a handful of assists or so a game. He's a good point guard. He's solid. He's potentially, I would say he's more than solid. He's good. Very good to star. I mean, I think part of it's where he's at. You know, like if he's going to be on a team that wins 30 to 33 games a season, like I think you have to be above and beyond to sort of be a quote unquote star. But he'll probably be the best guy on the team this year again.
I think the best case scenario for Collin Sexton is that he can be your second best player on a decent team. And I think that's, for me, even a little bit of a reach for him. Okay. That's not a bad place to be, you know, even out of a lottery pick. There's nothing wrong with that. But when you look at the rest of the roster, I don't see that out of Darius Garland. I don't think he can be your second best player, even in a best scenario. And I don't see that from any of the young guys who, yeah, they could be really good players. And, you know, the one we know least about, the draft pick from this year, Evan Mobley, maybe has got the highest upside because we haven't seen enough to say otherwise yet. And that's damning with faint praise. So I don't know. They feel like they still need that superstar player, and it's not on the roster yet. But
superstar, but
lots of things can change, and young kids can all of a sudden take that turn that you didn't really see coming, and all of a sudden they were really, really good. And we know that like Okoro and Mobley, you know, and even Sexton and Garland, they've got the pedigree for that.
They do. They have the pedigree. They have. I think they all have still pretty high ceilings that they can sort of reach to. Whether they get there in Cleveland, I don't know. But I mean, I'm not. I like Isaac Okoro. I think the world of him. I don't know how great he's going to be. I think he's probably. I'm going to wait and reserve on Isaac Okoro. I really like him. I don't want to damn him this early into his career. But Collin Sexton's a couple years in, and he's a superstar scorer as far as putting up a bunch of points. But as far as being a superstar that could sort of lead a team out of the dungeon, so to speak. I guess the best thing you can say about him is he helped you not beat Detroit, who we have next on the list, who won 20 games last year. But luckily for them, it was only 72. So could have been
good point.
A worse ratio of wins to losses. They got the number 1 pick, right? Cade Cunningham is a Detroit Piston. They got the 75-year-old guy out of Iowa, Luke Garza, right? Like he still gets to play. I mean, Kelly Olynyk, right?
So I'm going to say this about the Pistons, and it's not just because I live in Michigan.
Oh boy! Don't, Joel. Don't do it. Okay.
I am so much more comfortable with where the Pistons are heading with their roster than where the Cavaliers are. I think the Pistons are much further. I think they're further ahead now than where the Cavaliers are.
Okay, so they're 11 games back just on the standings, but as far as the roster construction itself, do you think it's enough to take them out of the deep basement this year?
I don't think they finish last in the division. I think that will be Cleveland. Detroit's going to be so young that there's going to be plenty of mistakes along the way. If I'm building a young, rebuilding roster, especially for a Detroit team that seems like it's been stuck in the middle for so long, whether it was the Andre Drummond era or before that, with the Josh Smith and Richard Hamilton stuff or Ben Gordon when he was there, ever since the Bad Boys 2 kind of faded out, Detroit was holding on to being in the middle, and it was never very exciting. And a lot of times it just wasn't very good either. Last year, they signed a whole bunch of veteran guys where they were trying to set a culture for the couple of youngsters that they had. You think of a team like that and why they're signing Mason Plumlee, for example. Why? Why are you doing that? Well, and they had multiple signings like that, but they wanted those guys in there to kind of set the tone. And now that some of the youngsters have been there, you look up and down this roster and it's a lot of young guys, or it's a lot of guys who were former lottery picks who they're still, this is a place to get minutes and try to resurrect your career. Cade Cunningham, I think, can be a superstar. Just as I said with Cleveland, I'm not sure that they have that guy. And again, we haven't seen enough of Cade Cunningham in an NBA uniform to actually know. But a number one pick, that's why you draft a guy like that. And I think that the pedigree and the tools are there for him to potentially be that. And then I look at somebody like Killian Hayes, who they took as a lottery pick last year. And I didn't love that pick at the time. But now putting Hayes next to Cunningham makes a whole lot more sense to me, because Killian Hayes, kind of like Darius Garland, he just does a lot of the right things well. I don't know exactly what he does at an elite level, but he's a gap filler, just like Malcolm Brogdon is in Indiana. And it's good to have a guard like that who's steady and reliable and smart and makes those right plays and doesn't mind being kind of the second fiddle to the guy who's really the star on the offensive end. And that's what Cunningham can be. And then Saddiq Bey and Saban Lee are both guys that last year got a chance, showed some real flashes as shooters. You got them in the mix. You got Josh Jackson, who really did a lot to resurrect his career in Detroit last year to at least be a rotation level guy who's young enough for some upside. Remember, Josh Jackson was the number 4 pick not too long ago and just nearly washed himself out of the league with Phoenix and Memphis with a lot of just immaturity. It seems like a lot of that has been put behind him in Detroit. So this is the exact place you want someone like that to get their shot. Isaiah Stewart was another young guy like Bey and Lee, who we didn't think a whole lot of last year, but a decent draft pick, and then got the minutes, and you're like, oh, this kid can put up double doubles. He's now the starting center and gets that job with Kelly Olynyk again as a guy who can stretch the floor and is a decent passer. And
he's fine.
Yeah, he's fine as a young-ish, veteran-ish guy who has played on some good teams both in Boston and Miami. He's got playoff experience.
And then you think about adding to like the big man Jeremy Grant, who like exploded last year, for like a huge career year last year, and that's a dude who's been in the league for a handful of years that just blew up in Detroit last season.
He was so good, and they were so excited by getting him that they were willing to give up Christian Wood, who was another prospect that they had brought in and tried to resurrect. And you remember Wood had that phenomenal end of his season 2 years ago that got him a huge contract. But the Pistons just traded Sekou Doumbouya to the Nets as part of that deal that brings DeAndre Jordan in so that the Pistons can buy him out. But Doumbouya was a guy that they were really high on. He looks pretty raw, and that's probably why they gave up on him. But they just knew they weren't going to have the minutes of power forward because Jeremy Grant has won over that spot, hands down. You've got Hamidou Diallo in the mix, who's another leaper. Trey Lyles has bounced around the league a little bit, whether it's been Utah, Denver. Last year or the last couple of years with the Spurs, but that's another guy who was a decently high draft pick and is going to continue to get looks, or is at least a solid replacement level guy. So they're young. They're not wasting their time on older guys, but they might have that superstar on the roster. And then all of a sudden you see a lot of other guys falling into roles where it's like, all right, Cunningham could be your guy. Jeremy Grant looks like he can be an all-star caliber player. Killian Hayes might be that steady Eddie at point guard. And you got a couple of young shooters who are pretty mobile. You got a guy with a chip on his shoulder in Josh Jackson and Isaiah Stewart. You're kind of rugged, traditional rebounding center.
And then you could start setting yourself up to be an attractive place for free agents or for trades and stuff. Like if you start building upon the success and, not winning 20 games next year, but winning, 35, 38, 40 games. Dare I say that would be double the output. Yeah.
That's absolutely their ceiling. There's going to be a lot of growing pains again this year, but you see where the foundation is supposed to be right now. And like I said, I see where it is in Cleveland, but it's less clear. Or I look at a place like Oklahoma City and I don't know what they're doing there yet as part of the rebuild beyond just accumulating as many assets and prospects as possible, which is a step. It's just a step a little further back than where Detroit is. So I like it. I like what they're trying.
Yeah. OKC just wants every future player possible. I mean, not even to use it, to just say, I want future players.
Right.
And we're going to build for the future forever because the future is forever. And you know what they say? They used to say, Joel, that the children are our future. So
I thought that's where you were going to
go. That's where we ended up going. All right. So is your big takeaway, you think? Because we'll do before the season our official how we think everybody's going to roll out. But your official thing is that Detroit's not going to be the last team in the division this year?
Yeah, here's my order, and then we'll take yours, and we'll
we're going
episode 75. Yeah, let's do it for the division. We don't have to talk conference or anything like that.
All right.
I'm going to go Milwaukee, Chicago, Indiana, Detroit, and then Cleveland at the bottom. That's how I
see. I will go Milwaukee begrudgingly because Chicago's going to be hot on their heels this year.
Really? You're that high on? All right.
Within like 5 games. I mean,
wow. Okay.
I think Chicago's got a chance to be really, really. Now, 5 games back could end up being like the 6th seed, like I say, but
most definitely. But still, you think of Milwaukee being a 3 seed, and if you're only 5 games back of them, that's saying something on your season, especially with the gap that existed this last year.
But I also think that like that 5 through 8 is going to be really jumbled. Like I think it's going to be a really tight race to sort of figure out seeing that we'll be figuring that out up to the very last day. So Milwaukee, Chicago, Cleveland, Detroit. That's right. And I think Indiana finishes last.
Wow. All right.
Yeah.
So, is that injury induced, or you think that's happening regardless of whether those guys are healthy or not?
I mean, I'll be fair. I'm not going to try to predict injuries for Indiana.
But we've yet to see them be healthy, right?
But I was going to say, like, I also don't have any reason to think that they'll be healthy. And at this point, and I don't think they're. I particularly just don't like them as a team going into this year. I thought they were there was a lot of chaos with that roster last year. And I know some things have changed, but I don't think enough has changed. And I don't think the team's that good, to be honest with you. I think, and like I also think the last team, because Detroit was like the second worst record in all of basketball last year. So I think I mean, they'll probably still win like 25 games or something, but I think that's a step down. What did they win last year? 34. So yeah, that would be a pretty big fall. But I do think, I think Indiana is just going to be. I think they're about to hit a wall.
I'm a big Malcolm Brogdon and a big Karis LeVert fan, so I'm hoping that's not the case. I really like both those guys as players. I like TJ McConnell as a backup point guard. But yeah, it's. Major pieces go down again, or especially if they wind up pulling the trigger on a Sabonis or Turner trade, which has been rumored for like 3 decades now, it seems like. It's not out of the realm of possibility. I think that'd be really shocking to me if suddenly the Pacers are worse than the Cavs and the Pistons. Like, that's a bizarro world to me, but I mean, it's stranger things have happened.
All right, Joel C. Cordes. I think that's going to do it for us. Next week, we will talk about the Southwest Division. That is over in the Western Conference. That features your Houston Rockets. Sweet. That was the worst record team last year. The Pelicans, the Spurs, the Grizz, and the Mavs. So next week, we do it big out in the West. Joel, say goodbye to the good people.
Goodbye, good people. And of course, if you're listening on Spreaker, Spotify, iTunes, wherever you get your podcast, please give us a like, share, a subscribe, all that good stuff. Tell a friend about us. Tell 10 friends about us. And if you want the video version, you can find us on YouTube as well. Like, share, subscribe, hit the little bell button for notifications, all of that good stuff. This has been episode 75. It's the George McGinnis episode. Go get some buckets.